In continuation of our last video, today we will take up the second passage from the same chapter, that is chapter 3, named Training, Literary and Spiritual. Yesterday we did literary training and today we will do the spiritual training. Training of the spirit means the soul. The spiritual training of the boys was a much more difficult matter than their physical and mental training, because in physical and mental training the students depend on books, on experiences, but spiritual training needs the training of the spirit. And he says he relied little on religious books for this spiritual training. He believed that every student should be acquainted with the elements of his own religion and have a general knowledge of his own scriptures. As for example, the Hindus, they should be having knowledge of the religious books like Ramayana, Mahabharata, Gita, etc. And the Muslims should have a knowledge of their Quran. Similarly, the Christians must have a knowledge of their Bible, which is their holy script. And therefore, Gandhiji says he provided for such knowledge as best as he could. But that too, his mind was part of intellectual training. Long before he undertook the education of the youngsters of the Tolstoy form and had realized that the training of the spirit was a thing by itself. To develop the spirits is to build character and to enable one to work towards a knowledge of God and self-realization. And I held that this was an essential part of training of the young. They should be trained to build a strong character, and all that training without culture of the spirit was of no use and might be even harmful. So he says he was familiar with the superstition that self-realization is possible only in the fourth stage of life, that is sannyas ashram, the fourth ashram. But it is a matter of common knowledge that those who defer preparation for this invaluable experience until the last stage of life attain not self-realization but old age. Now, who think that spiritual training should be given when a person enters the last phase of his life are wrong, because at that age, amounting to second and pitiable childhood, living as a burden on this earth. As it is said, old age is a second childhood when they depend on others for everything. So he says he had a full recollection that he held these views even while he was teaching, that is in 1911 and 12, though he might not have expressed them in identical language. Now, what was this spiritual training about and how was it to be given? He made the children memorize and recite hymns from their religious scriptures and read to them books on moral training, moral values. But that was far from satisfying him. As he came into closer contact with them, he saw that it was not through books that one could impart training of the spirits, just as physical training was to be imparted through physical exercise and intellectual through intellectual exercise. Even so, The training of the spirit was possible only through the exercise of the spirit. And the exercise of the spirit entirely depended on the life and character of the teacher. The teacher had always to be mindful of his P's and Q's, whether he was in the midst of his boys or not. So, teacher is a living example who can impart spiritual training to his students through the character he manifests. It is possible for a teacher situated miles away to affect the spirit of the pupils by his way of living. It would be idle for me if I were a liar to teach boys to tell the truth. If you teach your students to tell the truth, then you will have to be truthful first. A cowardly teacher would never succeed in making his boys valiant or brave. Only a brave teacher can make his students courageous. And a stranger to self restraint could never teach his pupils the value of self restraint. Gandhiji says that he saw, therefore, that he must be an eternal object lesson to the boys and girls living with him. They thus became his teachers, and he says he learned he must be good and live straight. A teacher must himself lead a straightforward life. He must be good, if only for the sake of the students. And he says he may say that the increasing discipline and restraint he imposed on himself at Tolstoy farm was mostly due to those wards of his, students of his. In order to teach the students about discipline and restraint, the teacher has to impose on himself all the values which he wants to inculcate in his students. One of them was wild, unruly, given to lying, and quarrelsome. Gandhiji is giving a description of one of his student who was very rude, who was always fighting. On one occasion, he broke out most violently. The student was very violent, and Gandhiji was exasperated, tired. He never used to punish his students, but this time he was very angry. And Gandhiji says he tried to reason with him, but the boy was adamant and even tried to overreach Gandhi. He did not follow Gandhi's instructions. He misbehaved. He crossed his limits. At last, Gandhiji says he picked up a ruler lying at the hand and delivered a blow on his arm. He gave a blow to the student. Gandhiji says he trembled as he struck him. He was sorry for what he did because he never punished his students. This was an entirely novel experience. Novel means new experience for them all. The boy cried out and begged to be forgiven. He cried not because the beating was painful to him. He could, if he could have resisted and controlled, but he was sorry for what he did. He realized the pain which drove Gandhi to take such a violent action. Never again after this incident did the boy disobey Gandhi. But I still repent that violence. Gandhiji says he still repents taking to the physical punishment. He says he is afraid. He exhibited before him that day not the spirit but the brute in the violent man in him. He says he has always been opposed to corporal punishment, that is, physical punishment, and he remembers only one occasion on which he physically punished one of his sons. He has, therefore, never until this day been able to decide whether he was right or wrong in using the ruler. Ruler means the scale with which he thrashed the boy. Probably was improper, for it was prompted by anger and a desire to punish. Had it been an expression only of his distress, he should have considered it justified, but the motive in this case was mixed. This incident set Gandhiji thinking and taught him a better method of correcting the students. He says he does not know whether that method would have availed on the occasion in question. The youngster soon forgot the incident and did not think he ever showed great improvement. But the incident made Gandhiji understand better the duty of a teacher towards his pupils. Case of misconduct on the part of the students often occurred after this, but Gandhiji says he never resorted to corporal punishment, that is, physical punishment means thrashing, beating, etc. Thus, in his endeavor to impart spiritual training to the boys and girls under him, he came to understand better and better the power of the Spirit.